We've discussed a lot of war on this show. We've talked about heroes and lesser-known stories and events and even some lesser-known wars and battles and stuff like that. And this week is about as accurate of a title for an episode that I can possibly come up with. Some of the things that soldiers have done, individual soldiers have done during war, is incredible. And we're going to look at five. It's 5 stories this week. I lose count. We're looking at 5 incredibly insane soldiers this week on Our Weird World.
Our Weird World.
Welcome to Our Weird World. I'm your host, John Henson, and this week looking at 5 stories from some just insane soldiers who are braver, probably crazier, but just no care in the world about what happened to them. They just went balls to the wall and just went for it. And they are way better people than you and I will ever be. So, yeah, we're going to look at the stories of Girar bin al-Azwar, Middle Eastern names, you know, Jacob Miller, Adrian Carton DeWart, Chris Ryan, and Yogendra Singh Yadav. Let's jump into it. Our first story is going way back to the year 634, to the story of Girar. I don't know how to say the DH sound. Like, his name is spelled Dhiraar. And like, once I get past the H, like, I feel pretty good about it. It's like a J sound, but not like a J, but like a Girar bin al-Azwar is what we're going to go with. And he was one of Muhammad's most trusted tax collectors during the Muslim conquests in the Middle East. You remember the Prophet Muhammad, the one that we're not really allowed to barely talk about, much less show an image of. But whenever a war broke out, because, you know, sometimes societies fight back when you try to conquer them, especially if you're going to try to impose a new religion. But whenever wars broke out during their conquest, Azwar happily hopped into battle and quickly earned the nickname of the Naked Warrior. Can you guess why? It's pretty easy. This isn't a trick question. He often decided against wearing any kind of armor in battle and instead just let his floppy wiener just kind of protect him from arrows and rocks and whatever else you used as weapons back then. His first battle came during the Ridda Wars, where he stopped a rebellion and confronted other Muslims on accusations of desertion. That's got to be like, it's got to be unsettling to just see this naked man fighting in a war. But then, like, if you're on his team and he's just like mad at you, like, all right, look, I'm sorry, this is where my head goes. Was he like visibly excited when he was either fighting in the battle or when he was like reprimanding his soldiers? Because, like, I mean, that does it for some people. That's not like a completely irrational thought. It happens. Like, that's just something about that turns some people on. I'm very curious now, because I wonder if he's just out there swinging in the breeze, or if he's just like third legging it, you know, just right there. Anyway, I'm sorry. Somehow this is probably super offensive to Muslims, and I don't know, man, but a lot of things seem to offend them, just like a lot of things seem to offend very conservative Christian people. So, hey, whatever, man. I'm looking at my levels here. I feel like I'm not very loud. Now I'm paranoid. I think I'm paranoid. That's a song. That's a very obscure reference. Anyway, not the Black Sabbath version, just a weird, grungy version. Anyway, Where are we at? By 6:34, I love how I just destroy all the momentum of this show during a very linear story when you need to keep following along, and then next thing you know, I'm just gone. Anyway, all right, this episode not going to be the greatest, but that's okay. By 6:34, the Muslims were fighting the Byzantines, and unfortunately for the Muslims, they were vastly outnumbered. At the Battle of Ajnadain, I feel pretty good about that one. The Muslims decided to confront the Byzantines one at a time, taking advantage of kind of their custom to never refuse a duel. So like rather than like full on like thousands of dudes fighting against each other, they just sent one guy out at a time and, made the Byzantines send out one guy because rules of war, man, pretty dumb. Aswar, who was obviously naked, he walks out to the battlefield and he challenged individual Byzantine officers to a duel. And this is like probably one of the greatest quotes in all of war. But he goes, "I am the death of the pale faces. I am the killer of Romans. I am the scourge sent upon you. I am Dirar bin al-Azwar." Oh, that hurt my throat. Like, how The Rock has not played this guy in a movie yet is beyond me. I don't understand why we haven't gotten a Naked Warrior movie. I mean, probably got to, adjust some of the titles and probably alter the storyline just a little bit to make it PG-13 or something. But, I mean, this feels like the perfect role for The Rock. But, he's getting old, so we kind of got to get on this pretty quickly. Aswar then single-handedly killed 2 Byzantine governors and a host of other soldiers that stepped forward to try to challenge him to a duel. The Byzantines, now lacking a lot of much-needed leadership, decided to retreat, and Aswar went on to fight in other battles, and there are conflicting records of his death, but, I mean, they're not really important because they aren't as cool as what happened there at the Battle of Ajnadain. So got through that one. Not sure how we're going to go through the rest of these. The next one here, going to the Civil War now, with the story of Jacob Miller. And other than the Battle of Gettysburg, the battle at Chickamauga was the largest Union defeat in the Civil War. In all, roughly 36,000 people were either killed or wounded at Chickamauga. Jacob Miller was one of those 36,000. And so during the battle on September 19th, 1863, Miller's face stopped a bullet dead in its tracks, which, of all of the things that you want to stop a bullet, your face is not one of them. And so he's now left with an open, bleeding bullet hole that is perfectly centered right between his eyes. I mean, you can see a picture of this guy if you look him up. Insane. He's just got a hole right in his forehead where a bullet just pew right in there. Miller's Union buddies, right after it happened, assumed that he was dead and left him behind. And the Confederates, as they made their victory march through the battlefield, came up on him, and they thought the same thing. Like, he's clear, like headshot, man, right there. He's done. There's no way he's alive. And honestly, yeah, that's the end of the story. Jacob Miller was just one of hundreds of thousands of deaths in the Civil War, and that's it. All right. No, of course not. Why else would he be in here? No, he wasn't dead. Miller actually woke up a few hours later and started chasing after the Confederates. And chasing being, not a great translation of the word. Using his gun as a crutch, Miller basically just walked to the next battlefield, and then he walked around the Confederate army and rejoined the Union troops on the other side. Because his uniform was soaked in his own blood, the Confederate troops didn't even realize that Miller was the enemy. Like, I don't know what color blood turned the navy blue Union uniform, but it was enough that it wasn't navy blue anymore. I can tell you that. And once Miller reached the Union side, he was picked up and rushed to a hospital, which I don't know why you need to rush at that point. He's clearly fine. His wound was so bad, however, that doctors decided not to operate on him under the assumption that he would probably just die soon anyway. So, why waste your time? And at that point, Union troops were already preparing to fall back once more and decided that Miller was too injured and not worth even trying to save. Like, that's just how harsh the reality of this war was. It's just like, you may survive briefly to get to a hospital, but if the troops are pulled back, like, everybody's got to grab their stuff and go. And if they don't think you're going to live, you're just going to get left behind. Miller, however, he wasn't having any of that nonsense. So he decided to get up, and he started walking with the rest of the Union troops. By then, though, his head had become so swollen that he had to physically pry his left eye open in order to see. Eventually, though, an ambulance wagon made room for him and picked him up and carried him to the rest of the way and to the hospital. 9 months later, Miller had surgery to remove the bullet, but doctors weren't able to remove the entire thing, which, I mean, it didn't end up mattering anyway because he ended up dying during surgery. So, no, I'm just kidding again. That was a weird sound. My voice has been weird the last couple of episodes. No, Miller actually ended up living another 30 years with a musket-sized bullet hole in his forehead. And what's crazy is, like, years after, like, if he ever bent down at the right angle, like, little pieces of musket shot would drop from the hole in his head. Crazy. And like I said, like, you can look up pictures of this guy, Jacob Miller. Can't miss it. Can't miss it. It's an old-timey Civil War looking dude with a hole in his head. So, just crazy. Next, we go to World War I. And Adrian Carton de Wort, who was born to a wealthy family in Brussels on May 5th, 1880. He was actually rumored to be the illegitimate son of King Leopold II. I don't know if it's true or not, but that's what all the sources say. He was then raised in Egypt, where his father worked as a lawyer, which allowed Adrian, obviously, to receive a well-rounded education. And with a name like Adrian Carton de Wort, of course he did. When the Second Boer War broke out in 1899 in South Africa, Adrian left to join the British Army under the name Trooper Carton. I don't know what the Boer Wars were in South Africa, but they were a thing. It was Britain. They just fighting wars all the time. Once he got to South Africa, Adrian was almost immediately shot in the stomach and the groin, and he was sent back home. Upon learning that his son had actually dropped out of school to go get shot in a war, Adrian's father was absolutely furious. Adrian, however, he didn't care and rejoined the military as a reserve, where he was sent back to South Africa to be with the 4th Dragoon Guards. When the conflict ended, Adrian spent his free time playing all sorts of athletic activities like polo, boar hunting, jogging, and inserting swear words into every possible position in a sentence. Like, this dude was a notorious potty mouth. That's what he was known for. Just everyone... I don't know. I don't have any examples of, like, actual sentences that he said, but he cussed a lot. So, fun guy. He was promoted to lieutenant and then appointed to be an assistant to Sir Henry Hildyard, who was the commander of the British military at the time. And thanks to his aristocratic lineage and connections, Adrian then spent time traveling all over Europe and staying with various royals in Austria, Hungary, and Germany. In 1908, get this name, all right? Adrian married Countess Friederike Maria Caroline Henriette Rosa Sabine Franziska Fugger von Babenhausen. Like, why? Why do you have that many names? And, like, do you write all of those names out every time you, like, sign your name or something? Like, man, it's so dumb. Like, just take three tops. But, like, that's all you need. But no. Maybe she added all of the other ones too. Maybe she added, like, Carton de Wort, or maybe just de Wort, to the end of her last name, because that's what she needed. She needed more words in her name. Anyway, they had 2 daughters. It's not really important to the story. When World War I began, Adrian was already fighting in Somalia in a smaller war against the followers of Mohammed bin Abdullah, who the British just didn't like him for whatever reason. I don't know. It's not important. But while there, Adrian was shot in the face twice, losing one of his eyes and part of an ear. And despite that, he jumped on the first ship he could find to go back to France in 1915 to join the fighting in Europe. And thinking it couldn't possibly get worse, Adrian fought along the Western Front, where a bullet went through his skull at the Battle of Somme. He also injured his right hand and asked the attending doctor to go ahead and just amputate it. When the doctor refused, Adrian pulled off every single one of his own fingers. That's intense right there. Like, I look, and this is, me stereotyping, but like, I don't see this Adrian Carton de Wart, who married this royal, who had this really lavish upbringing, to be the same guy who just like, he's in a battle and he gets shot and he's like, yo, doc, cut off my hand so I can go back out there. And the doc's like, no, I'm not doing that. Fine, I'll do it myself. Whap, 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 whap. Fingers are gone. I got a nub. Let's go. Like, just crazy. Adrian was also shot in the hip at the Battle of Passchendaele. He was shot in the leg at Cambrai, and then he got shot through his other good ear, his remaining ear, at Arras. He also ended up losing his other hand in another battle. Despite all of that, Adrian kept fighting through the end of World War I, receiving the Victoria Cross, which is the highest award for combat in the British military. And following World War I, Adrian was sent to help the Polish people in their fight against the Russian Bolsheviks. He tried to broker peace between the Poles and various surrounding countries, but didn't have much success because, it's Poland. They just kind of got screwed over every single time. Even worse, on a return trip out there, his plane crashed in the Polish countryside, which then allowed him to be captured for a brief time by the Lithuanians, who were involved in this somehow. When World War II started, he's still around. Adrian continued his work in Poland, even though they weren't particularly interested in what he had to say, mainly because they were more concerned about the Germans coming and invading. In 1940, he was transferred to Norway, where he was just completely outnumbered without any proper equipment, and his troops were forced to evacuate. After spending a few months in Northern Ireland, Adrian was sent to Yugoslavia to try to prevent Hitler from invading there. But on the way to Yugoslavia, the plane he was in had an engine failure and crashed into the sea, knocking him unconscious as soon as he hit the water. But then the cold waters of the Mediterranean shook him back to life just in time for him to be captured by the Italians. And he and his fellow prisoners then spent the next 7 months digging a tunnel in an attempt to escape from the prison, which, after 4 other failed attempts, actually worked. I don't think this is another Jesus Christ, what is the Stephen King novel book thing with Andy Dufresne? Oh my God, why am I blanking on this? Oh, it's not The Longest Yard. And it's not The Green Mile. Shawshank Redemption. Thank you. Enough of you screamed at your phones or car speakers and willed that one. I don't know if that's another Shawshank Redemption sort of reference, but, well, I've derailed the show again with another tangent. Anyway, but yeah, he tried 4 times, finally dug a tunnel out and escaped prison. He then spent 8 days disguised as an Italian peasant, even though he didn't speak Italian at all. And he was also, at this point, 61 years old before he was then recaptured. Shockingly, the Italian government then chose Adrian. He's basically like a bionic man at this point. He's lost so many of his limbs. And they chose Adrian to send a message back to the British about organizing a peace treaty because the Italians are done at this point of the war. They're trying to get out. Adrian happily agreed and was told that he needed to obtain civilian clothes in order to keep his mission a secret. Adrian, though, he is a career military guy. Like, he didn't want to give up his military uniform, but he eventually relented and decided to dress as a civilian on the sole grounds that he not resemble a gigolo. Those are his exact words. After his release, Adrian then spent the next few years doing diplomatic work between India and China. He finally retired in October of 1947, but on his way home, Adrian stopped in Myanmar to visit an old friend, and while he was there, he slipped on a mat, which obviously caused him to fall, and he broke several vertebrae in his back and knocked himself unconscious. And despite that, he managed to live another 16 years before dying on June 5th, 1963. Just indestructible, this guy. Next, we're going to the Gulf War. And We're going to the story of Chris Ryan, who, along with 7 other members of Bravo 20, a British Special Air Service force, they were given a mission to cut a fiber optic cable out in the desert along a busy Iraqi road. It's supposed to be just an easy tertiary mission just to kind of contribute to the war effort. Nothing crazy was expected. But honestly, like if it had actually been an easy tertiary mission, like we wouldn't be talking about it right now. Upon landing, Bravo 20 realized that they had been dropped right next to an Iraqi army base. And normally, like, this wouldn't really be a big deal because they could just radio in and have a rescue chopper come whisk them away, but not this time because their radios completely stopped working. And after a few minutes of trying to figure out what to do and probably, stopping for tea or something because, they're British, a lonely single goat herder walked by and discovered their unit. The goat herder quickly ran off and alerted the Iraqi army, who then immediately sent several trucks full of Iraqi soldiers out to meet them. Bravo 20 didn't have any weapons to fight back with because they're just there to cut a cable. Like, that's it. They weren't expecting any combat. 3 of the members of the team, Chris Ryan, Vince Phillips, and Malcolm McGowan, got away. The other 5 soldiers were unfortunately captured and killed by the Iraqis. Without their radios, which weren't even working anyway, the 3 soldiers decided to just walk in the general direction of Syria, which was conveniently 200 miles away with nothing but desert in between. And then it started snowing, which obviously that's what happens in Iraq. Who knew? And so for the next 3 days, Ryan, Phillips, and McGowan trudged through the snow without any of the proper survival or cold weather equipment because it obviously was not part of the checklist that involved the necessary steps to just cut a simple cable. Unfortunately, Phillips succumbed to hypothermia and became delirious and just wandered off in the middle of the night and was never seen again. The next day, McGowan and Ryan were spotted by another goat herder. These freaking goat herders, man. Ryan, who at this point, he knew not to trust an Iraqi goat herder. He drew his knife, all right, as the guy approached. McGowan, on the other hand, he clearly hadn't learned his lesson. And instead, McGowan asked the goat herder for food. And the goat herder gave a nod and then probably a really evil smile as he then led the 2 soldiers right to the Iraqi army. McGowan was captured and tortured, but Ryan got away again. So by now, Chris Ryan, he's run through his entire supply of water. He's dehydrated. He's hypothermic. And after a few more days of wandering through the desert, Ryan miraculously happened upon a rushing stream and filled his canteen with as much water as he possibly could. But when he took the first sip, he quickly realized that that was not water. And instead, it was actually toxic waste from a nearby industrial plant because A, it's Iraq and they're not going to have any environmental standards anyway. And B, of course, that's what's going to happen in a story like this. Were you expecting anything different? No, of course not. So despite ingesting all of that cancer, Ryan felt relatively refreshed and decided to continue on. He finally arrived at a large barbed wire fence that marked the border between Iraq and Syria. And despite having his entire team killed, his feet covered in blisters, Ryan had made it 200 miles through the desert. And then he somehow found the strength, probably from all the radioactivity flowing through his body, to then climb the fence and plop himself back into Syria, which marked the first time in recorded history that anyone willingly, happily, and voluntarily wanted to be in Syria at any given moment. He then found a family who, after a thorough investigation, revealed 0 goats that needed to be herded. They gave him some food and water. And for the next year, Chris Ryan was in and out of the hospital for kidney failure and malnutrition. 2 years later, he still wasn't declared fit for the British military, which honestly probably isn't even that hard to do anyway. But in the end, Chris Ryan ended up surviving, making a full recovery. And it's an insane story. Our last story here is of Yogendra Singh Yadav, who was born on May 10th, 1980, in a part of India that, like, I don't really understand because I don't really know how their government works. I think they have like provinces or states, but then like some of them are like more Pakistani versus India, but then there's like a sub ethnic group of Indians up in there. I don't know, man. It's pretty complicated. When Yadav was 16, he joined the Indian Army to fight in the Kargil War, which was a 2-month conflict between India and Pakistan that arose basically after Pakistan disguised themselves as Kashmiri militants and invaded India for no real reason. Wars. Once Yadav finished his training, he was sent to the Ghatak Force, which is the special operations platoon in the Indian Army. So on July 4th, 1999, Yadav and 17 others were sent to capture 3 bunkers on Tiger Hill, which is actually a 5,000-foot tall mountain in the Kashmir region of northern India. It's just funny, like a 5,000-foot hill in North Carolina is a mountain, all right? Like Grandfather Mountain, like one of the most famous mountains in North Carolina, is like 5,300 feet. But in India, that's a hill. Like, fun times on this planet. The bunkers were that Yadav and his crew were sent to capture were perched at the top of a 1,000-foot cliff that also just so happened to be covered in ice. But obviously, like, Yadav didn't care about that. He's in this episode for a reason. He's going to do something crazy. Yadav volunteered to lead the assault, climbed the face of the cliff, and installed the ropes that would allow the rest of the platoon to follow him up. But halfway into his climb, an enemy bunker on the next hill, I guess, over, popped open and began firing machine guns and rocket launchers at Yadav and the rest of the platoon while they're like up on this cliff trying to get up. Within minutes, 3 Indian soldiers were dead. Yadav had been shot 3 times in his groin and shoulder, but like, I guess I get it. Like, he decided it was easier to just climb another 60 feet to the top of the cliff instead of falling 900 feet to his death. When he got to the top, he discovered that it was unfortunately occupied by more Pakistani soldiers. But instead of climbing back down, Yadav ran towards the gunfire and then, like, cricket pitched a grenade through the window, killing 4 of the Pakistani soldiers. That bought the rest of his platoon enough time to scale up the mountain and capture the first bunker. By then, the second bunker was well aware that they were under attack, and they started opening fire. But instead of holding up inside that first bunker that they had captured, Yadav then ran again towards the... that's a weird interruption. I'm sorry. I should edit this stuff out, but I don't. Yadav ran again head first into the oncoming fire since it had worked so well the first time. The problem, though, that he was out of grenades at this point, so he just busted through the door and killed 4 more Pakistani soldiers with his bare hands. Like, how bad are you as a soldier where you have machine guns and dude just waltzes right in, just Kool-Aid Man's himself through your bunker door and kills how do you kill 4 people in a 4-on-1 fight? The more I think about it, the more improbable that sounds, but it happened. It's documented. Like, I mean, like, what? I get one guy. You get one. All right. Sure. That makes sense. But then how the other 3 guys didn't end up killing him, I don't understand. The rest of the platoon figured that Yadav, who already had 3 bullet holes and a broken leg, was dead. He did this with a broken leg, by the way. They then used that inspiration to quickly capture the 3rd and final bunker. When the Indian Army regrouped, they posthumously awarded Yadav the Param Veer Chakra, which is an award so rare that it has only been given to 21 people, and 2/3 of those it was awarded to posthumously. Basically, it's like the Medal of Honor on steroids. A few days later, they realized that they had mistaken another dead soldier for Yadav, who was just currently like recovering in another hospital while they had given him this award. So yeah, just insane stories all around. Let's get out of here. So yeah, did I sell it well enough? I mean, just crazy stories, just insane tales of bravery and survival. Yeah, I don't know what else to say other than let's see what we learned today.
What did we learn?
Number one, The Rock really needs to play the role of Gerard bin Al-Azwar, the naked warrior, in a movie one day. Like, he was already the Scorpion King. He was already, I don't know, in The Mummy, I think, or maybe the Scorpion King was an offshoot of The Mummy. I don't know, man. He's just in all of the action movies where they need a muscular dude. So, I don't know, man. They really need to come up with a screenplay for this one. Number two, Jacob Miller got shot right between the eyes, and he lived the rest of his life with a hole in his head that sometimes spit out musket shot. It's crazy. And number three, Chris Ryan walked 200 miles across the apparently frozen Iraqi desert to get to Syria willingly. And he survived and lived to tell about it. So just insane. Next week on Our Weird World, we are still counting down to episode 100. We will have 3 episodes to go before we reach the epic 100th episode celebration. And next week's episode, a very strange topic. We're looking at 3 examples of what might be spontaneous human combustion. We're going to look at the stories of Countess Cornelia de Brandy, Mary Reeser, and Betty Satlow. Is spontaneous human combustion a real thing? I don't know. I still don't know. It's very strange, though. These 3 stories, kind of difficult to really figure out what exactly happened. But we will look at these stories and jump to our own stupid conclusions. All right? Sounds good? Great. Thank you for listening. Keep telling all your friends and keep it weird.